If you found yourself here, it's probably because you have a strange and wonderful mind. Let me reassure you, you are in the right place. My name is Sarah, and this is Sarah After Dark. Welcome back, my little creeps. In today's episode, we're going to be talking witches and the true story of the Pendle witch trials. So buckle up, grab your broomsticks and gather around your cauldrons. Now, I get asked this question a lot. Are witches real? And the simple answer is yes. Not the fictional hocus pocus sense, but in a nature-based, religious and spiritual level. Today, individuals identify as witches practicing witchcraft or Wicca. And no, these aren't just females either. Men can be witches. The term witch is a gender-neutral term. So, however, some males may actually prefer to be called a wizard. Some even may go as a sorcerer. It's very Harry Potter, isn't it? Most people think that witches are a Christian invention, but they're not. They date much further back to ancient times, well before Christ. In fact, the first ever documented witch was recorded in 3000 BC. It began as a healing practice with herbal medicines and their connection to the spiritual world. But as Christianity spread through Europe, the perception of witchcraft changed from being actually very respected to a very punishable offence. The church deemed those who practice witchcraft to be at one with the devil, to be satanic and almost demonic. In 1542, the UK Parliament actually passed something known as the Witchcraft Act, making witchcraft punishable by death, which then led to the infamous witch hunts we all know about today. When thinking about witch hunts, they instantly jump to the Salem witch trials. However, Europe alone saw an estimated 60,000 executions for witchcraft, and that was between the 15th and the 18th century. But once the 18th century had hit, the legal system actually did this full 360. They declared that witchcraft was not real. So they then changed the laws, making it still a crime, but the crime was now fraud. So anyone claiming to be a witch or practicing any sort of magical powers, including fortune telling and even being a psychic medium, they would be liable for a fine and even possible imprisonment. This was known as the Fraudulent Mediums Act. And it's slightly ironic because it's documented that witchcraft was once used as a military weapon. During World War II, British occultists performed a mass ritual to curse Hitler's invasion plans. So get this. They're claiming that it's not real, it's fraud. They've also killed, at this point, thousands and thousands of people who are being deemed to be witches, but when they wanted to use it to the country's advantage, then suddenly it's okay. That just sums this country right up, I think. Anyway, by 2008, these acts and laws were scrapped completely, and still to this day, there is no specific law in the UK stopping anyone from the practice of witchcraft. And that still is what it is. You can, if you want to be a witch, you can legally be a witch. There is so much more when it comes to the history of witches and everything that went on, especially with government and parliament and kings and queens. But I just wanted to give you a brief outline before we dive into today's story. And today's story is about the Pendle witch trials. You've probably heard of it, but let's get into it. Pendle Hill is located in Lancashire. It has been deemed one of the most paranormal hotspots in England, with ghostly sightings, strange occurrences, and an energy presence like no other, bringing people to believe that the witches of Pendle Hill are still very much there. So, what actually happened? We travel back 400 years in 1600s when King James I is on the throne. As we spoke about earlier, we are currently at a point where people are fearful of evil. They've been led to believe that these witches live amongst them. They believe they are dark and satanic, and the general public are fearful, they're scared, and suddenly everybody becomes a suspect, especially the Catholics. Now, we all know Bonfire Night, and it really does link up here because Bonfire Night, aka Guy Fawkes Night, all began to celebrate the failed gunpowder plot. If you don't know what happened, the Catholics basically set to blow up the House of Parliament on the 5th of November with King James and his family inside. But King James was tipped off, and when they searched the building, they found somebody hiding in the cellar. And it was a man called Guy Fawkes. He had the gunpowder and everything on him. It was pretty obvious what he was going to do. And he was caught red-handed. He then became the face and the name to why we set off fireworks every single year. So Sarah, how is this relevant? Well, it is relevant because the plot was all ran by Catholics. They thought by killing King James, it would make a stance and they could essentially take over and the Catholic Church would be the new prominent religion. But because it was failed, Catholics were then put into a box that people feared, along with those, of course, deemed to be witches. King James even went as far as writing his own version of the Bible, which had scripture in it saying, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," meaning if you are a witch, then off with your head, sort of thing. So back to the Pendle Hill witch trials. The story centres around two rival families in the 1600s. The first family is led by 80-year-old Elizabeth Southerns, also known as Old Demdike. She lived with her daughter Elizabeth and Elizabeth's children Alison, James and Janet. Now, Demdike's family were poor. They were barely getting by. They had no real source of money, so they would beg or even steal if they had to. But Demdike did have one source of income. She was known as the village's cunning woman. A cunning woman was known as a wise woman, a healer, someone who was skilled in herbal medicine. Unlike witches, these were actually respected in the community, and they were seen as people who could warn off the evil. If someone in the village was sick, they would go to Demdike for herbs and a cure. The other family, the rival family, was led by Anne Whittle, and she was known as Old Chattox. Anne was also a cunning woman, and similar to Demdike, she was also a widowed grandmother living with her daughter, also called Anne. She also lived with her granddaughter, called Mary. There was a lot of money to be made by being a cunning woman, and there was a lot of money involved with it, and this is what caused the ultimate rivalry between these two women, because you've got two widowed grandmothers who are simply trying to look after their family with no money, living in poverty. So they want to be the best at what they do. They want to be the person everyone goes to, and essentially they want to make the most money, because money is the key to being fed, clothed and having essentials. There was another reason why these families absolutely hated each other, and that was because Demdike and her family held Old Chattox responsible for the death of Elizabeth's husband, John. John had apparently been paying for protection to Old Mother Chattox to actually protect his family from her and her witchy powers. So he was giving her so much oatmeal every year as an agreement, but for whatever reason in 1601 the oatmeal wasn't paid, and that just so happened to be the year that John died. And on John's deathbed he actually claimed that his sickness was caused by Chattox. So it's safe to say the families absolutely hated each other. So let's fast forward to March 1612. Demdike's granddaughter Alison was walking on a pathway on Pendle Hill when she passed a peddler known as John Law. Now, a peddler was a guy who usually travelled around on foot selling various household items to the villagers. Alison approached John and she asked if she could buy some pins. John knew the family and he knew the family was poor. And back in them days, metal pins were really expensive because they were actually handmade. So John instantly dismissed her. John then ended up falling down to the ground and was unable to move or speak. He was then taken to a local inn, and Alison actually turned up asking for forgiveness. She believed that she had set a curse onto John, and that was the cause of his sudden illness, which was really the start of all the accusations that were about to happen. You see, John's son Abraham had heard everything that Alison had said and apparently confessed to. So he decided to contact the local magistrate and accuse Alison of witchcraft. So out comes the magistrate to investigate the case. He comes into the village and he's known as Roger. Naturally, Roger went straight to Alison to interrogate her, and she had this utter breakdown, starts to confess everything, even telling him that she had sold her soul to the devil and that she did in fact put a curse on John. But she didn't end there. In fact, what she then did was threw old Chatix under the bus, claiming that she was responsible for the death of 4 people. And she even accused Chatix's daughter Anne of making clay figures, which back in them days, they would be known as voodoo dolls. But this is where the story gets out of hand, because James, Alison's brother, told the magistrate that Alison had confessed to bewitching a local child. Elizabeth even told them that her own mother, Demdike, had a mark on her body from the devil. And Demdike owned this. She admitted it. In fact, she said that she had sold her soul over 20 years ago to the devil. And it wasn't long before the accusations began pouring out towards the Chatix family. So he naturally then went over to speak with the Chatix. The magistrate, who was known as Roger, believed that he had just uncovered the biggest case of witchcraft. And in an attempt to impress the king, he sent off Alison, Demdike, Chatix and Anne to Lancaster prison, where they'd be imprisoned for 4 months until their trial. Of course, not the whole family. Well, that was about to change, because on Good Friday, by the way, if you weren't in church on Good Friday, in the eyes of King James, you were deemed evil and everyone would be suspicious of you. Now, Roger, the magistrate, gets this tip off that there is a gathering which is being held on Good Friday at Demdike's house, hosted by Elizabeth. He believes it was a meeting for witches to gather and plot against their families being released from prison. So he turned up with his men, and everyone pretty much is arrested. Elizabeth, James, and even local villagers who were at that house. And this is where the story starts to take its form, because Janet, Elizabeth's other child, agreed to testify against her own family to basically save herself. So on the 18th of August 1612, the courtroom of Lancaster Castle was ready to hear the case of the Pendle witches. Everybody was to be put in front of the judge. Well, everybody but Demdike. And that is because during that 4-month imprisonment, Demdike actually died in the dungeons. And it's interesting because every family member pleaded in different ways. Alison, for example, was remorseful and full of sorry, still admitting fault, whereas Elizabeth was angry, claiming she was innocent and was confused why her daughter thought that she was a witch. But it was Janet's turn on the stand, who, by the way, at the time was 9 years old. She claimed that the gathering that happened on Good Friday was exactly what the court thought. She said all 20 people were witches. She even told the court that her brother James was a witch and had been for 3 years. He had even played a role into killing people. The court then brought in all of these different people that they had collected from this gathering and allowed Janet to identify whether they were actually there or not. And it's so weird to think that they put this on to a 9-year-old child. Was she under the understanding that what she was saying and accusing not only her family of, but these people of, will in fact lead to their death, their hangings? I'm not sure. Anyway, the trial lasted 2 days, in which the jury found all to be guilty of causing death or harm by witchcraft, and 10 people were sentenced to be hung. The day after, them who were found guilty were brought to Gallows Hill in Lancaster and hung one by one until there was no more. But this was one of the most brutal ways to die, because the force of the drop was not enough to break their necks. So they were actually left hanging until they did eventually pass, meaning that they died a slow and, I imagine, very painful death. Reports actually say that each person took up to 20 minutes each to die. Can you imagine just being hanging in front of loads of people? You don't die suddenly. You're just left swinging there, waiting to slowly strangle. It's a scary thought, and many people believe that the magistrate Roger actually groomed Janet into saying what she did. In fact, it was later revealed that Janet was living with Roger once her whole family had been imprisoned. They think that Roger wanted this to be the biggest catch of witchcraft so bad that it would impress the king and lead him to maybe getting a title or even getting a reward for it, some land or some money, that he was willing to go to the ends of the earth, literally persuading this child and telling this child what to say on trial to get his own way. Now, that is simply an allegation and that is not a fact. However, there is a lot of things that do look like that could be true. Since then, Pendle Hill has become a paranormal hotspot for ghost hunters and even those who identify as witches to come and mark their respects. The area over the years has had its fair share of ghost sightings and people who go back for a glimpse of what it was. But the deaths did not occur at Pendle Hill. This was just their home, not their end place. So why do ghostly sightings happen at Pendle Hill? Well, it's believed over the years that because of what happened to the people of Pendle, satanic rituals and spiritual ceremonies have occurred on the land. It is also believed to be a Bronze Age burial site, and during World War II, 2 pilots lost their life also on Pendle Hill. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Pendle Hill is haunted, but what actually lies there, well, we will never know. That was a lot of history, wasn't it? I love the paranormal, that is no secret to you guys, but it's also the history that intrigues me, because for us to understand why a place is haunted, we have to dig back a little bit deeper to find the cause. And I think it's really important when it comes to land sites and buildings in general. There has to be a reason why somewhere is haunted, and it usually lies something quite dark, if not sinister, and sometimes a very emotional story. Once the weather gets better, because right now it is an absolute no-go, I could not think of anything worse than going out into the countryside while it's raining in England. But I think once it hits the summertime, I'm going to try and get out to Pendle Hill. I would like to conduct my own paranormal investigation, have a walk around and maybe document the whole journey. So there probably will be a point later on in the year where we revisit this subject in podcast, but I will also be doing some long form content on YouTube, maybe some short form content on TikTok covering that investigation. If that's something that you would like to see, then please do let me know. I'm very interested in seeing what you guys would like to hear also. So if you've got a topic you would like me to cover, if you've got a place in particular you'd like me to cover, please don't be shy. Either direct message me if you have that access, send me an email, or even comment below this podcast. A big thanks to anyone who may have returned and is once again on a Wednesday listening to me. It is very much appreciated. If you could spare a few minutes to rate and leave a comment on this podcast, it will massively help. It'll help the podcast to grow. It will allow me to do this every single Wednesday. And I want to keep talking to you guys. So if you could do that, that would be amazing. And until next time, keep being a little bit weird and even a little bit spooky. Good night.